Further, the President has, both personally and acting through his agents and subordinates, together with the Vice President, directed the United States Attorney for the District of Columbia to decline to prosecute for contempt of Congress the aforementioned witnesses, Joshua B. Bolton and Harriet E. Myers, despite the obligation to do so as established by statute. That's in 2 U.S.C. Section 194, and pursuant to the direction of the United States House of Representatives as embodied in its resolution, H. Res. 982 of February 14, 2008. In all these actions, President George W. Bush has acted in a manner contrary to his trust as President and subversive of constitutional government, to the prejudice of the cause of law and justice, and to the manifest injury of the people of the United States. Wherefore, President George W. Bush, by such conduct, is guilty of an impeachable offense warranting removal from office. Article 29, conspiracy to violate the Voting Rights Act of 1965. In his conduct while President of the United States, George W. Bush, in violation of his constitutional oath to faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and, to the best of his ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, and in violation of his constitutional duty under Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, has both personally and acting through his agents and subordinates willfully corrupted and manipulated the electoral process of the United States for his personal gain and the personal gain of his co-conspirators and allies, and violated the United States Constitution and law by failing to protect the civil rights of African American voters and others in the 2004 election, and has impeded the right of people to vote and have their vote properly and accurately counted, in that, A, on November 5, 2002, and prior thereto, James Tobin, while serving as the Regional Director of the National Republican Senatorial Campaign Committee and as the New England Chairman of the Bush-Cheney 04 Inc., did, at the direction of the White House under the administration of George W. Bush, along with other agents, both known and unknown, commit unlawful acts by aiding and abetting a scheme to use computerized hang-up calls to jam phone lines set up by the New Hampshire Democratic Party and the Manchester Firefighters Union on Election Day. B, an investigation by the Democratic staff of the House Judiciary Committee into the voting procedures in Ohio during the 2004 election found, quote, widespread instances of intimidation and misinformation in violation of the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act of 1968, equal protection, due process, and the Ohio right to vote. Unquote. C, the 14th Amendment, Equal Protection Clause, guarantees that no minority group will suffer disparate treatment in a state, federal, or local election, in stating that, quote, no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. However, during and at various times of the year 2004, John Kenneth Blackwell, then serving as Secretary of State for the state of Ohio, and also serving simultaneously as co-chairman of the Committee to re-elect George W. Bush in the state of Ohio, did, at the direction of the White House under the administration of George W. Bush, along with other agents both known and unknown, commit unlawful acts in violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution by failing to protect the voting rights of African American citizens in Ohio. And further, John Kenneth Blackwell did disenfranchise African American voters under the color of law by willfully denying certain neighborhoods in the cities of Cleveland, Ohio, and Columbus, Ohio, along with other urban areas in the state of Ohio, an adequate number of electronic voting machines and provisional paper ballots, thereby unlawfully impeding duly registered voters from the act of voting, and thus violating the civil rights of an unknown number of United States citizens. A, in Franklin County, George W. Bush and his agent, Ohio Secretary of State John Kenneth Blackwell, co-chair of the Bush-Cheney re-election campaign, failed to protect the rights of African American voters by not properly investigating the withholding of 125 electronic voting machines assigned to the city of Columbus. B, 42 African American precincts in Columbus were each missing one voting machine that had been present in the 2004 primary. C, African American voters in the city of Columbus were forced to wait 3 to 7 hours to vote in the 2004 presidential election. Subparagraph 2, willfully issuing unclear and conflicting rules regarding the methods and manner of becoming a legally registered voter in the state of Ohio, and willfully issuing unclear and unnecessary edicts regarding the weight of paper registration forms legally acceptable to the state of Ohio, thereby creating confusion for both voters and voting officials, and thus impeding the right of an unknown number of United States citizens to register and vote, this relating to the activities of Ohio Secretary of State John Kenneth Blackwell. A, Ohio Secretary of State John Kenneth Blackwell directed through Advisory 2004-31 that voter registration forms which were greatest in urban minority areas should not be accepted and should be returned unless submitted on 80-pound bond paperweight. Blackwell's own office was found to be using 60-pound bond paperweight. That's an 80 bond paperweight as opposed to a 60 bond paperweight in his own office. Subparagraph 3. The Secretary of State willfully permitted and encouraged election officials in Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Toledo to conduct a massive partisan purge of registered voter rolls, eventually expunging more than 300,000 voters, many of whom were duly registered voters, and who were thus deprived of their constitutional right to vote. A, between the 2000 and 2004 presidential elections, 24.93% of the voters in the city of Cleveland, a city with a majority of African American citizens, were purged from the voting rolls. B, in that same period, the Ohio County of Miami, with census data indicating a 98% Caucasian population, refused to purge any voters from its rolls. Miami County merged voters from other surrounding counties into its voting rolls and even allowed voters from other states to vote. C, in Toledo, Ohio, an urban city with a high African American concentration, 28,000 voters were purged from the voting rolls in August of 2004, just prior to the presidential election. This purge was conducted under the control and direction of George W. Bush's agent, Ohio Secretary of State John Kenneth Blackwell, outside of the regularly established cycle of purging voters in odd-numbered years. Subparagraph